Chris.
Clayton.
How are you?
I'm great. I'm good. Happy to be here.
Welcome to Milwaukee. Welcome to Nō Studios. We appreciate you coming. Tell me about the sake we have right here. It's the White Sun,
So Clayton,
right?
you are pouring a Junmai Ginjo from Fukushima. It's the smallest brewery in Japan.
Really?
There's only 3 people. There are 2 brothers who do all the brewing, the Oki brothers, and the owner is Oya-san, and the 3 of them run this tiny brewery. And the brewery is probably about 100 years old.
Wow.
So the sake is called White Sun.
Right.
And I think when you taste it, you'll get a sense of the sort of the magnitude and presence of the sake. So kanpai.
Kanpai, yes. Beautiful. Let's give it a shot here. So what got you into sake?
That's a great question.
Right. You started out in wine, right?
Right. I came from the wine distribution business, and that was my career for decades. And I thought that was going to be my career for, till the end. And then, but I never saw sake coming.
Right.
And one cold, snowy Friday afternoon in February, I got a phone call from a young man in New York who was starting a sake import company.
Right.
And he asked me if I'd be interested in bringing the sakes in. And I said no, because I didn't know anything about sake. How could I possibly sell it? But he said, you sell amazing wine. And the whole thing with wine is you get to know the people behind the wine, and you just tell their stories. And he said, it's the same with sake. And we're like, okay, maybe I can do that. And that was 15 years ago. And so he was right. And it's all about the people. It's always been about the people behind the product.
Lovely, lovely.
So,
and it seems a lot of people when talking about sake are like, oh, that's like Japanese wine.
Right.
Tell me about the difference, because it's not really wine, really.
No, it kind of drives me crazy. But I mean, it's perfectly understandable, right?
Yeah.
Because there isn't an equivalent in the United States.
Right.
It's probably closer to brewing beer than it is to fermenting wine.
Right.
Because you have to malt the rice.
Right.
And we use certain ingredients like koji to turn the starch into glucose, and now you can make alcohol.
Right.
Well, grapes arrive in the winery as a little bag of sugar water, essentially, and you pop them and ferment them and you're done.
Right.
But with sake, we are coaxing sugar out of the grain, and as we're doing that, we're able to ferment it. So it's this sort of long, continuous process that takes sometimes up to several months to get done. So it's not really a wine, but who cares, right?
Yeah, right.
Who cares? It's
That's
great.
Good.
It's a wonderful product. And the more you drink it, the more you understand that it's...
I've noticed that,
Yes, it's really special.
Do you remember the first sake that you had, right? Because we're drinking a Junmai Ginjo right now. Do you remember what variation it was?
I do. Mm-hmm. So that young man sent me a box of samples, and I put them in a circle around me on a Friday.
Right.
And all the labels had fallen off. I had no idea what anything was. And I just opened them and I started tasting them in a circle. And I had no idea what anything was, because it didn't taste like wine. It didn't have any tannin. It doesn't have the acid. So all my reference points that made me so smart as a wine guy was just like taken away. Right. And I'm tasting and I get to one and I was like, wow, this is amazing. And it was a Junmai Daiginjo from northern Japan. Okay. And I instantly fell in love with that one.
Wow.
But it was also, like most of my clothes, the most expensive stuff is the only stuff that fits.
Yeah.
So I started there, and I've spent 15 years working my way backward to the more workaday sakes that are more traditional.
Right.
And kind of like what sake was, not what it is today, because there's 2 distinct worlds.
And for those that don't know, because we know that a Junmai Daiginjo is the more expensive brand.
Right.
Can you explain why that is?
What is that word?
Like in terms of like the rice fermentation and everything.
So imagine a hard-boiled egg.
Right.
And if you make the sake from the whole egg, it's going to taste very grainy and malty and kind of wheat germ. Mm-hmm. And that's sort of what hot box sake is. But if we polish away, think of an agate or a stone, you polish away 10%, it'll be a little more refined.
Right.
And we polish away 20%, it will definitely be more refined. It will start tasting lighter. And if we every 10% more, we have a new word to describe it.
Right.
So you go from futsushu, which is 20% milled away, to junmai, which is 30% milled away, to ginjo, which is 40% milled away, to daiginjo, which is a minimum of half of the rice is milled away.
Right.
So if I started with 1,000 pounds of rice, I have 500 pounds of rice the size of a head of a pin, and I have 500 pounds of rice flour to sell for feed. So that term, daiginjo, represents the most highly milled rice.
Right. Wow.
Most
wonderful,
delicate.
Wonderful. Yeah, it's delicious. Yeah, good.
This is sort of just below that. It's got more body.
Right.
But still very pretty.
Love that.
Right.
So you spent some time in Japan too, right? So
I have been very lucky.
What areas were you in Japan?
So Sake Story as an importer.
Right.
Our founder, Toshi Kojima, lives in Seattle, but was born and raised in Tokyo. Mm-hmm. And his grandparents and great-grandparents were in the rice business. So sake and rice have always been part of his life. Right. So when he started the company, he got help from family members.
Right.
And explored north to south and up in the mountains and down at the coast. So our imported portfolio, the breweries we work with, are scattered north to south and the Pacific side to the Sea of Japan,
right.
up in the mountains, and then down in the river bottoms. So they're all over the place. So you ask me, where do we go? We get on a train, and we go madly dashing around the country for like 2 weeks.
I love that.
And come home completely shipwrecked, but having had a wonderful time.
I'm jealous of that. That sounds amazing.
It's great. And, so we get to know each of the families. So for us, you arrive at the brewery, you have a little tea, talk about the kids, catch up on business, and then you start tasting sake.
Of course. So real quick, we should have mentioned in the beginning, but of course, Chris Griese, you are a part of Sake Story, of course. So can you just touch on that, what Sake Story is, what it means,
sure.
and everything like that, what your job is?
Mm-hmm. Right, we're an import company.
Right.
And we import sake, craft beer,
right.
And some whiskey distillers and shochu producers. So our portfolio is actually pretty diverse.
Yeah.
So Toshi Kojima brought his portfolio to Minnesota, which is where I'm based,
right.
probably 10 years ago.
Wow.
And Toshi and I met then, or shortly after that. And for a number of years, I was his distributor in Minnesota.
Right.
And then I left the wine business because by then I was totally smitten by sake and I just really wanted to go forward with this, which is so interesting to me. And I also felt like these families needed somebody like me who kind of understood the American side of the business to sort of introduce them to a wider market.
Right.
And Toshi was busy on the West Coast, and I said, I'll take everything east of the Rocky Mountains. That's what I do. We are a two-man band.
Wow.
Plus our long-suffering accountant, Tomoko Liedweiler, who does all the books. And that's really it. We're no larger than this company.
Wow. I love that. Welcome to Milwaukee, by the way.
We're tiny.
Right, yeah. What kind of things are you doing while you're in the city of Milwaukee? Of course, you're here with us for the tasting. Yeah.
You have a great restaurant scene going on here.
There's some good restaurants.
And I know, like everybody else, you've had all the COVID, issues to deal with and probably lost some restaurants. But everybody that I've seen the last 2 days is like vigorous and coming back. And if they could just find more employees. But everybody is really interested in sake. It's like a bit of an odd duck. You know, all of the wine somms know wine.
Right.
But almost nobody understands sake So they're all really open to interesting conversations. So that's pretty much all I do is run around your fair city and introduce people to our sake and answer questions.
I love that. So in terms of like, spirits, different alcohols, beers, things like that, sake seems to be the most unique in terms of the cultural like background with it, and it's such like a Japanese thing, and it's so cool. You can feel like a sense of the culture coming from the beverage. Do you have
great,
any? What does that feel like? How can you explain that, I guess? And what was it like when you were in Japan at breweries, like really feeling that?
Well, the first time I went, it was like diving into a pool of perfectly warm water, and it was the most exotic place I had ever been.
Wow.
And the people and the language and the culture were just so different. Mm-hmm. And the formality of the Japanese culture was something that was totally new. I didn't know when to bow, when not to bow, how deeply to bow, when to take my shoes off, when to put them back on. So everything was a learning experience. It was really exciting. So I just tried to sort of share that discovery and the pleasure of discovering something new. I mean, sake is 3,000 years old.
Right.
It's not a Johnny-come-lately. And it's incredibly refined. And it can also be incredibly like country, rustic, umami.
Right.
It can be all of those things. So the fun for people when they're discovering sake is, first of all, they're like, wow, I didn't know sake could be like this.
Right.
And then they're like, I have no idea what I'm tasting. I don't even know how to describe it. So I try to help a little there. And for me, I'm just sharing like what my learning process was, kind of leaving the wine world, jumping into sake. I was completely a babe in the woods again. And of course, going there, I had no Japanese language skills. Right. So I was very quiet. I mean, I've spoken to you more in this interview than I would in 10 days in Japan.
Fair.
So you listen a lot.
Wonderful.
And, but I think for most people, they don't know that it's fermented.
Right.
They think that it's distilled, and it's not.
Right.
No one knows what the alcohol level is, and it's generally 14 to 17%. So it's a little stronger than wine, but it's very gentle, and it's very clean brew. I don't think I answered your question.
No, that's okay. That was great. That was all necessary information that we all love to hear. Well, great. I wanted to, one last thing, just ask you, what is something that you could get people excited about for sake story, and things like that? Motivate people to want to try this beverage. Yeah.
Well, one thing, I just think that it's really good to, in this one life you're given, as far as we know, you should explore as much as you can. And Japanese culture is strong in this country. I mean, you just look at the restaurant scene. And sake is a direct connection to 3,000 years of Japanese history. Mm-hmm. And so if you're brave enough to take the plunge, and try it and allow your palate some time to evolve, it's just like listening to music or watching films. The more you do it, the more appreciation you'll generate. So it's right here in front of you. Try it. Give yourself that moment to do something absolutely different and see where it leads you. So that's what I would recommend.
I love it. Well, wonderful. Thank you to Chris Griese from Sake Story.
Thanks.
My name is Clayton. I'm from Nō Studios here, Sake Sommelier. Chris has taught me many wonderful things, and we're really excited for you to be here with us for our sake tasting. So
it's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Nō Studios.